Just moments ago, the palace was shaken by an announcement no one anticipated. After decades of silence, Princess Anne broke her long-held vow in a stunning on-camera revelation, naming the man she claimed is not Prince Harry's biological father, an identity that contradicts what the world has always believed. With the monarchy suddenly on edge, and the consequences only beginning to unfold, the atmosphere changed instantly. What began as a calm, almost ceremonial setting turned tense as Anne unfolded a single handwritten letter, her hands steady and her expression unreadable. There was no introduction or softened language, only carefully chosen words delivered by a voice that had waited years to be heard. The silence after her opening sentence was heavier than any royal scandal before it, signaling that this was neither a clarification nor a symbolic gesture, but a seismic disclosure. Line by line, the letter outlined a truth and said had been hidden in plain sight, a truth tied directly to Princess Diana, and one Diana herself had allegedly begged to protect until silence became more dangerous than honesty. Outside the palace gates, confusion erupted as unanswered questions echoed, social media exploded with fragments of Anne's words, and across the country people paused, sensing that something fundamental within the monarchy had just shifted, and referenced Diana with deliberate care, almost reverence, speaking of fear, isolation, and a young mother caught between duty and truth. She described a secret never meant to shame a child, but to expose a system that demanded obedience over honesty. Her voice never wavered, yet the weight behind her words was unmistakable. Then came the line that froze the room, a confirmation that the late Queen had known, not suspected, not heard secondhand, but known and had chosen silence in the name of stability, and neither accused nor excused. She simply stated the fact and allowed its implication to hang in the air like a question no one dared voice. As this unfolded, Prince Harry was thousands of miles away, traveling and unaware, his name dominating headlines while he moved through an ordinary moment, not knowing the ground beneath his identity was shifting. That contrast alone deepened the shock, a son learning last, a family deciding first. Across the nation, reactions split instantly. Some felt betrayed, others vindicated, many overwhelmed with grief. For a man who had always seemed to stand slightly apart, understanding now why, the monarchy built on certainty and lineage suddenly felt fragile, exposed, and deeply human. And folded the letter, looked up, and said no more. But the damage was already done, because once spoken, truth does not retreat, it only waits for the next door to open. To understand the full weight of this moment, however, one must look back to years of quiet meetings and secrets, and carried for decades. Behind palace walls, she had always been the silent sentinel, her restraint not weakness but strategy. She watched truths buried, faces lie, and legacies built on foundations she knew were false, and her decision to finally speak was not a quest for applause, but an act shaped by loyalty, discipline, and restraint, qualities that defined her presence while others maneuvered for favor, and she simply observed, while others spoke and remembered. Those closest to her often mistook her stillness for acceptance, never realizing it was calculation, because and did not forget she catalogued and waited. There were small, easily dismissed moments when the mask slipped. A tense pause during a family gathering, a clipped exchange in a corridor, a lingering look shared with Diana that hinted at unspoken understanding. Insiders recall subtle friction between Anne and Charles, moments charged by what was never said, often circling back to a sentence Diana once whispered one and would not repeat until now. That tension hardened after a private confrontation with the Queen, intended to remain confidential, a conversation between daughter and mother, crown and blood, but instead becoming a fracture. And left that meeting changed, her trust bruised by the realization that loyalty had limits and silence carried consequences. From then on, she stopped assuming the truth would surface on its own and quietly, methodically began collecting what others tried to scatter, not rumors or hearsay, but documents, dates, and reports that never reached daylight. She learned which drawers were never opened, and which files were shifted just often enough to be forgotten. Each discovery strengthening her resolve not to expose for spectacle, but to protect what she believed had been betrayed. Trusting almost no one, she formed a private triangle of discretion, a financial confidant sworn to secrecy, and a royal physician whose conscience outweighed ambition bound by shared risk and the belief that some truths require patience. And never rushed. She waited for the moment when speaking would matter more than preserving comfort. Those around her noticed the change after the Queen's death. Her posture heavier, her gaze more direct, restraint intact but hesitation gone. Grief stripped away obligation and replaced it with clarity, and with the matriarch gone, and no longer felt bound to promises made under different rules in a different era. She revisited old memories with new urgency, hearing intention in conversations once dismissed as emotion and precision in warnings once thought vague, until she understood her silence had become part of the machinery she despised. Remaining quiet was no longer loyalty, it was complicity. The decision came with sleepless nights and a full awareness of its consequences, but reached a conclusion she could no longer escape. Some secrets rot when buried too long, some truths demand a witness, and she had been watching long enough. It all began, she claims, with a sealed envelope and a desperate plea from Diana, delivered in secret to, and on the eve of a funeral, raising the chilling question of whether Diana knew her time was limited, and left behind a final clue meant to surface only when the moment was right. Diana's handwriting held just one chilling line. "He's not who you think." It was a moment and never spoke of publicly until now, tracing back to a royal reception long before Diana's final days, when the air was thick with pageantry, but something in Diana's eyes told a different story. As cameras flashed and the world admired her elegance, Diana moved quietly through the crowd, focused not on guests or royals, but on and alone. With careful timing, she pulled her aside. Out of earshot, no witnesses, no traceable words, only a steady grip of the hand and a sealed letter. Diana offered no explanation, only a condition. The envelope was to remain unopened until one of two moments arrived: either Harry turned 35 or the Queen passed, whichever came first. Only then, Diana said, would one understand why she had been chosen and why the truth could not surface too early or too late. And honoured that request for years, keeping the envelope locked away far from royal archives and prying eyes, yet its weight grew heavier with time. She thought of it during family gatherings when Harry stood slightly out of step, carrying a tension he never seemed to understand, and again as the Queen's health faded, sensing the clock on silence was winding down. After Queen Elizabeth's funeral, and finally opened it, and the sight of Diana's handwriting brought back the fear in her voice and the finality of that day. The words inside were brief but devastating. Diana did not hint. She named the truth, identifying a man and had only heard whispered about, a name both ordinary and explosive: Major James H. The letter offered no full account, nor was it meant to, but its purpose was unmistakable. Diana wrote that she suspected her private medical records had been tampered with, that palace doctors were ordered to prioritize discretion over accuracy, and that when she pressed for independent testing, she was bluntly warned that public exposure would carry consequences for her and her sons. And later admitted she had heard whispers of such threats before, but reading them in Diana's own words transformed speculation into certainty. This was not tabloid fantasy, but a mother's final defense of her child, a challenge entrusted to someone Diana believed would not only guard the past, but confront the future. It was a royal landmine, buried deep enough to protect her boys, but not so deep it could never be found. And Diana's letter was not the only evidence and held. Hidden within obscure compartments of royal archives lay an unauthorized DNA test secretly conducted, shockingly conclusive, and quietly locked away. Its origins dated back to 1993, when palace whispers began hardening into something more dangerous than rumor. Trapped in a collapsing marriage and relentless scrutiny, Diana feared not just for her reputation, but for her sons' futures, especially Harry's, because behind the headlines she carried a truth no one was ever meant to confirm. But her instincts told her she had to know for certain. In absolute secrecy, and confided in a royal physician, a man who had earned her trust over years of quiet support, and who understood that Diana's warnings were not imagined. They signaled something real. He agreed to help, and together they orchestrated what should have been impossible: a private DNA comparison using samples from Harry, Prince Charles, and another man whose name Diana never spoke aloud, yet whose identity would soon emerge from the shadows. The results were devastating and definitive: a 0% match with Charles, and a 99.7% match with Major James Hewitt. It wasn't speculation or theory. It was cold, clinical science, irrefutable, and shattering the illusion of lineage the monarchy had maintained for decades. What followed was worse than a cover-up. It was erasure. The physician was quietly dismissed from his role, within weeks officially labelled retirement, though whispers suggested otherwise. Files disappeared from hospital archives, and Diana, warned through back channels, realized she had crossed an invisible line carrying consequences she hadn't anticipated. But Diana was not the only one who saw the report. Years later, during a quiet estate audit and stumbled upon a misfiled folder among estate inventories. It was thin, just 3 sheets of paper, but one line burned across the top in red. "Forbidden to disclose," HM ordered. Her breath caught as she realized the contents. The very DNA test no one was supposed to see again. And took it, not to expose it immediately, but to preserve it, understanding in that instant why Diana had whispered rather than shouted. The monarchy would not allow this truth to surface, not because it wasn't true, but because it was, and hid the file, locked it behind layers of protection, knowing the day would come when the document mattered more than the scandal it threatened to unleash. Now, with Diana's letter opened and the Queen gone, the report had become more than evidence, it had become reckoning. Yet if the truth was so clear, why hadn't Diana revealed it herself? What or who was she protecting? There was only one woman Diana trusted in those final, closing in moments, not Camilla, not the Queen, but Anne. What followed was a silent pact between sisters-in-law to protect Harry's emotional peace, no matter the cost. Their bond had never been loud, nor designed for public display or polished interviews. It was quiet, forged in shared glances across cold palace rooms and hushed conversations behind closed doors. And, not known for warmth, recognized pain. Diana, in turn, saw in and someone who could be trusted not to take sides, but to guard a truth too dangerous to name aloud. Diana feared that revealing Harry's true paternity would do more than damage the crown. She believed it could break him. He had already grown up under the relentless scrutiny of a media circus, labeled the spare, dissected by tabloids, and trapped in a world where affection was scarce. To tell him he didn't belong in the very family that shaped his life wasn't merely unthinkable, it felt cruel. And understood that instinctively. And listened not with judgment, but with a heavy stillness that spoke louder than words. When Diana finally whispered, "He's not Charles's son," it wasn't scandal, and heard it was fear. Diana wasn't weaponizing the truth. She was burying it not for herself, but for her child. She asked, and to keep it secret, to protect Harry from the world, from the institution, and sometimes from himself. And gave her word, with one condition. If the truth ever threatened the survival of the monarchy, she would have no choice but to act. Diana understood, because though she distrusted the palace machine, she still believed in the ideal of it, the hope that one day her sons would shape a kinder, more human crown. She wanted Harry shielded long enough to grow into that destiny. That night, Diana revealed something else. Charles had known for years, and had chosen appearances over confrontation, image over intimacy. According to her, this wasn't indifference, it was calculation, and behind it stood Camilla. Diana claimed it was Camilla who first suggested Harry be gently distanced from the line of succession, not abruptly, but slowly, behind the scenes, gradually erased. After Diana's death, and changed. She stopped attending certain briefings, ceased laughing in Charles's company, and though she never voiced blame, her silence spoke volumes. It was grief, yes, but also discussed a quiet protest from someone who had seen too much and said too little. Years later came the rupture. Harry and Meghan's departure, the interviews, the exile, the accusations. And saw the consequences of silence, a man unraveling on the world stage, grappling with an identity built on illusion, and remembered her promise. To protect Harry, but to act if the lie began consuming the family from within. That moment had arrived. Meanwhile, Harry himself was quietly seeking answers. Long before Anne's revelation, doubts had haunted him deep, unspoken, painful. Secretly, he ordered his own DNA test, fearing the rumors weren't just headlines. The results were shocking, but incomplete. All his life, whispers had followed him through prep schools, royal tours, and military bases. He didn't resemble Charles. He was Diana's son through and through. At first, he brushed it off, a cruel joke, tabloid obsession, but deep down, a part of him wondered. What if the gossip hid the truth? What if my instincts, long dismissed as paranoia, were trying to tell me something? Confiding in Meghan one sleepless night, Harry called himself a decoy prince. Someone meant only to fill a role, never to inherit the crown. Meghan listened, and then did what no one else had. She believed him, not as a husband unraveling, but as a man searching for clarity in a life dictated by duty and secrecy. Together, they made a choice that could never be undone. While living in California, Harry arranged a private DNA test under an alias. The clinic was discreet, the process clinical, but the weight of what it might reveal was unbearable. Days turned to weeks. When the results arrived, they didn't scream, they whispered uncertainty. Genetic markers misaligned with royal lineage expectations. Nothing conclusive, but enough to shake the fragile narrative Harry had clung to for years. Meghan, shaken by the findings, urged him to confront his family, to ask Charles. But Harry hesitated. Part of him didn't want the truth. He wanted peace. Confirming what he had feared his entire life felt like burning the only bridge left to the family he still longed to belong to. Harry reached out to, and not through formal channels. No aides, no royal protocol, just a personal message. One he wasn't even sure would be answered. When her reply came, it wasn't what he expected. She didn't confirm the truth, but she didn't deny it either. She told him only this: "You will know when it's time." That silence haunted him, fueling sleepless nights, strained interviews, and emotional distance. Slowly, he realized the institution had never protected him, it had protected itself. And if the truth was as close as Anne's eyes suggested, everything he had once trusted had been constructed around a lie. Now, with Anne's revelation tearing through the monarchy like wildfire, Harry's fears were no longer theoretical, they were headlines, undeniable and public. His response was swift, but what of King Charles? His silence was more than strategy, it was rage. Sources reported that upon learning of Anne's disclosure, Charles erupted behind closed doors. Priceless objects thrown, an aide dismissed, and Camilla left in tears. This was not only personal, it was an existential threat to his reign. Hours after Anne's bombshell, the palace descended into chaos. Clarence House became a hub of frantic activity as Charles summoned senior aides, legal advisors, and communications chiefs to suppress the fallout, bury the footage, discredit Anne's claims, and regain control. But it was already too late that Anne's revelation struck at the monarchy's central illusion: lineage, blood, legitimacy. For Charles, who had spent a lifetime in the shadows of queens and expectations, it wasn't just humiliating, it was destabilizing. If Harry wasn't truly his son, what did that mean for decades of royal history? For every public appearance, tour, ribbon cutting, and uniform worn under the assumption of royal blood. Reports suggest Charles's fury turned physical. A crystal decanter shattered, an aide asking for clarification was dismissed on the spot, and Camilla, tearful, tried to intervene but was rebuffed. He didn't want comfort, he wanted control. Yet Anne, the one person who had always afforded him silent loyalty, had detonated the one claim he considered untouchable: his paternity of Harry. Worse still, a private line to William remained silent for hours, followed by a brief, furious exchange. William demanded clarity, and refused to recount. Boxed in by family fractures and media pressure, Charles realized he was alone in the storm. Though the crown rested on his head, the weight of scandal had never felt heavier. In response, he reportedly considered drastic measures. If the public questioned Harry's place, scrutiny would extend to finances, military appointments, security, and honors. Sources claim he ordered a full legal review of Harry's privileges, aiming to strip them not as punishment, but as precedent, a desperate effort to assert authority amid institutional embarrassment. Beneath the rage, however, lay fear. A man whose identity had just been challenged, exposing the first crack in a monarchy already strained by generational tension, modern pressures, and years of unresolved betrayal. Meanwhile, the world turned to one burning question: who is Harry's real father, and where is he now? For years, James Hewitt had vanished from public view. But in a twist no one expected, he was recently spotted leaving a discreet legal office in Surrey, sparking speculation. Is he preparing a statement, or something even more explosive? Hewitt, once tabloid gold as Diana's former confidant and rumoured lover, had long been linked to Harry's striking resemblance. Over time, he disappeared from the public eye, offering no interviews, denials, or commentary. His silence, once assumed to be avoidance, now seems like strategy. Princess Anne's revelation changed everything. By naming him, even indirectly, she reopened a chapter many had assumed closed.